They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but what if a single photo could cost a life? When she pressed post on that wedding photo, she wasn't sharing a secret, she was sharing her joy. Yet, in less than an hour, that moment of happiness triggered a violent storm. Her husband, her supposed soulmate, would rather throw her life away than let the world see his face. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you ignored every warning, every inconsistency, because you wanted so desperately to believe in them? Why would a husband, just 24 hours after saying, "I do," choose to silence his wife forever, all because of a Facebook post? The answer isn't just chilling, it's almost unthinkable. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a warning, a reminder that trust can be the most dangerous thing you'll ever give someone. So, before you share your life with the world, before you ignore the little voice inside you that questions the one you love, ask yourself, is there anything they're afraid of the world knowing? By the end of this story, you'll understand why that question might just save your life. Let's go back to the beginning, to where love and lies collided, and the truth cost her everything. The kind of person whose laughter could fill a room and whose social media feed painted a life of quiet strength and hope. A 52-year-old woman who had endured more heartbreak than most, failed relationships, broken promises, and the lingering weight of loneliness. Yet, despite everything, she never let go of her belief that love could still find her. For years, she watched friends share their wedding photos and anniversary celebrations online. She cheered them on while silently wondering if that kind of joy would ever be hers. Then came a trip that changed everything, a spontaneous vacation to Colombia. She booked it on a whim, hoping for a change of scenery and a chance to reset her life. What she didn't expect was to meet someone who seemed to bring that unshakable hope back into focus. He appeared as if from a dream, handsome, charismatic, and attentive in ways that made her feel seen. He had a smile that felt sincere, the kind of presence that could make someone believe they were the only person in the room. But there was something else about him. He was quiet, a little too private, but in a way that felt intriguing, rather than concerning. They met at the resort's poolside bar, where the air was thick with the scent of tropical flowers and fresh sea breeze. She had been sitting alone, soaking in the sunset, when he struck up a conversation. He asked about her life, listened intently, and made her laugh. A rare kind of laughter that comes after months of silence. By the end of their conversation, she knew she wanted to see him again, and he seemed equally eager to stay by her side. For the rest of the trip, they were inseparable. They explored local markets, shared dinners beneath the stars, and danced to live music as the waves crashed in the distance. When the vacation ended, their connection didn't. They exchanged numbers, made promises to keep in touch, and followed through. What began as daily texts quickly turned into late-night phone calls that stretched into the early morning. Their bond grew stronger with every conversation, even though they were separated by thousands of miles. But as much as their romance blossomed, there were pieces of him she never fully understood. He spoke very little about his past, just vague mentions of bad luck, and an insistence that he was ready to move forward. She asked questions about his family and his childhood, but his answers were short, as if those parts of his life were irrelevant now. He also made one thing very clear. He hated social media. He told her it was a toxic place filled with people who didn't want others to be happy. He believed in keeping his life private and only sharing meaningful moments with those closest to him. For someone like her, who loved posting photos of her travels and daily musings, this was a stark contrast. Her online presence was her way of staying connected to friends and family, of sharing her joys and lessons learned. She believed that happiness, when shared, could inspire others. At first, she struggled to understand his perspective, but love makes us compromise. She reasoned that everyone has their boundaries, and this was his. She convinced herself that respecting his privacy was a small price to pay for a relationship that made her feel so alive. Still, there were moments that left her unsettled. When she asked to take pictures together, he often found excuses to avoid it. "Let's live in the moment," he'd say with a charming grin. Or, "We don't need photos to remember this." Sometimes she'd catch him staring off into the distance as though his mind was far away. But when she asked what he was thinking, he'd wave it off with a laugh. She wanted to believe it was just part of who he was, a man who valued his privacy. After all, he never showed anger or impatience. He was calm, reassuring, and attentive. And for someone who had been through so many disappointments, his steady presence felt like an anchor. Despite the unanswered questions, she clung to what she thought they had: a real chance at happiness. Their love story unfolded like a fairy tale, fast, passionate, and full of promise. From the moment they met in Colombia, everything about their relationship felt like a whirlwind of emotions she had only dreamed of. It was a second chance at happiness, a gift she thought life might never offer again. Months later he proposed. It wasn't an elaborate spectacle, but an intimate, heartfelt moment. He took her on a surprise weekend getaway, just the two of them, to a cozy cabin by the lake. There, under a blanket of stars, he knelt down and asked her to be his forever. She said yes, without hesitation, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed with gratitude that love had finally found her. But even in the midst of this joy, his boundaries remained firm. She had imagined announcing their engagement to the world, sharing pictures of her ring and basking in the congratulations of friends and family online. Yet, when she brought it up, he gently reminded her of his feelings about social media. "I'd rather keep this between us," he said with a smile. "Our love is special, and I don't want it diluted by people who don't understand it." Though it stung, she respected his wishes. She told herself that what mattered wasn't the likes or comments, but the man she was about to marry. And so, the engagement remained a private celebration, known only to their closest circle. As the wedding day approached, her excitement grew. She had spent years attending weddings as a guest, quietly wishing she could be the one walking down the aisle. Now, her turn had finally come. She poured her heart into planning an intimate ceremony, a gathering of close family and friends that reflected the simplicity and sincerity of their love. The venue was a small chapel adorned with fresh flowers, their fragrance filling the air as soft music played in the background. The guest list was limited to those who had been there for her through life's ups and downs. For her, it wasn't about the size of the crowd, but the depth of the connection she shared with those present. On the big day, she looked radiant in her white gown, the train flowing behind her as she walked toward the man she believed was her forever. The look in his eyes as he watched her approach made her heart swell with joy. The ceremony was beautiful, vows exchanged with trembling voices, promises sealed with a kiss, and applause that echoed through the chapel. It was everything she had hoped for, yet a part of her wished she could capture the moment and share it with the world. As the newlyweds stepped out of the chapel into a shower of rose petals, she reached for her phone instinctively, eager to snap a picture. But he stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. "Let's keep this just for us," he whispered. She hesitated, but then nodded, smiling as she put the phone away. Their reception was equally intimate. A candlelit dinner with their loved ones, heartfelt toasts, and a quiet first dance under twinkling lights. It was the kind of night she had always dreamed of, filled with laughter, love, and the belief that her future was finally secure. Yet through it all, the absence of photographs and posts felt strange. Friends and family asked if she would share the pictures later, and she assured them she would. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't. For him, privacy was paramount, and for her, love meant compromise. She told herself that a relationship wasn't about public displays, but the quiet moments they shared when no one else was watching. And as they left the reception hand in hand, heading toward their honeymoon destination, she believed with all her heart that she had made the right choice. But the cracks in their picture-perfect story were already beginning to form. And soon, the love she thought would last forever would lead to an outcome she could never have imagined. The honeymoon was picture-perfect. The ocean stretched endlessly, its waves lapping gently at the shore, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and blooming flowers. Their suite overlooked the water, with large windows letting in the morning sun as it spilled golden light across the room. She woke up slowly, savouring the quiet joy of the moment, the man she loved sleeping peacefully beside her. She turned toward him, watching him for a while, overcome with gratitude. This was everything she had dreamed of. He was the man who had reignited the part of her that had once felt lost. She had said "I do" to a future she believed would be filled with endless joy and companionship. As he slept, she reached for her phone. It wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing her joy. Her happiness felt too big to keep to herself. She felt an overwhelming urge to let the world know that after all the heartbreak and loneliness, she had found love again. She scrolled through her photos, pausing at a candid shot taken by one of their guests. They looked so happy, their smiles wide and genuine. Her fingers hovered for just a moment before she selected the photo and began typing. "Just got married." She smiled as she added another line. "I love you, baby." Her heart felt lighter as she hit post. She imagined her friends reacting with joy, sending congratulatory messages and heart emojis. She could already see the comments flooding in. Words of encouragement and excitement from the people who had followed her journey through life's ups and downs. But as her phone pinged with notifications, something else was unfolding. In less than an hour after the upload, the young man got a call from one of his con artist colleagues. The voice on the other end was sharp and full of panic. "What sort of mistake did you just make?" the voice hissed. "Why are you trying to bring us down?" He frowned, still half asleep, not fully grasping the gravity of what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" he muttered, confused. There was an exasperated sigh on the other end. "Go check your latest wife's Facebook page." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He scrambled to open his phone, his fingers shaking as he navigated to her profile. And there it was, the picture, the caption, the flood of likes and comments confirming that their private moment had now become public knowledge. His heart pounded as he stared at the screen. In that instant, the calm, loving man she thought she knew was gone. Panic surged through him, turning into fury. He stormed toward her, phone in hand, his face flushed with anger. "Why did you post this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. She looked up, startled by his tone. "I wanted to share our happiness," she said softly, still not understanding why he was reacting this way. "I told you I don't like that stuff. Take it down," he shouted, gripping his phone tightly. Her expression shifted from confusion to hurt. "It's our wedding picture," she said firmly. "This is my life too. I can decide what I want to share." Her refusal only heightened his panic. The stakes were too high for her to resist him now. His cover was slipping, and every second that post remained online was another step toward everything unraveling. For her, it was a simple celebration of love. For him, it was a ticking time bomb that could destroy everything he'd hidden. And as her refusal stood firm, something in him snapped. Because for a man with so much to lose, even love wasn't worth exposure. He stood there, staring at her with an intensity she had never seen before. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he clenched his phone in one hand and pointed at hers with the other. "Delete it," he said, his voice low but trembling with barely restrained anger. She blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "What?" she asked softly, still trying to process the demand. "I said delete the post," he repeated, louder this time, the calm and affectionate tone she was used to nowhere to be found. Her smile faltered as she sat up straighter. "Why? It's just a picture of us. I was happy." He took a step closer, his face tightening. "I told you before, I don't want our life on social media. Why is that so hard for you to understand?" She stared at him, hurt flashing in her eyes. "It's not about you, it's about me. I've waited my whole life for this moment. I've shared everything else, my struggles, my triumphs, and now I can't share this. The happiest day of my life." His jaw tightened as he listened, but her words didn't ease his anger. Instead, they made his fear more real. His mind raced with the implications. What if someone had already recognized him? What if everything came crashing down because of a single post? "It's not about happiness," he snapped. "You don't get it. Just delete it." She pushed her phone away and stood up, matching his intensity now. "No, I'm not deleting it," she said, her voice steady but strained. He stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious? You're choosing some post over me?" "It's not about the post," she shot back. "It's about why you're so desperate to hide this. Why can't the world know we're married? Why can't I share this part of my life?" She was pleading for an answer, but he had none to give her. Not one that wouldn't expose the truth he had buried so deeply. The room grew quiet for a moment, but the tension between them felt like a storm about to break. He took a deep breath, as if trying to calm himself, but the fear in his chest was suffocating. She reached for her phone again, intending to walk away and cool off, but he was faster. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "Give me your phone," he growled. Her eyes widened, shock overtaking the anger. "No!" She tried to pull her hand free, but his grip tightened. "Just give it to me." "Why are you acting like this?" she yelled, her voice cracking. "This isn't you!" But in that moment, she realized she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her at all. The calm, protective person she thought she knew had vanished, replaced by someone driven by desperation and rage. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "This was supposed to be our honeymoon, our fresh start." He didn't respond. His focus was locked on the phone, his entire world narrowed down to that screen, and the post that threatened to expose everything. In one swift motion, he wrenched the phone from her hand. "You don't understand what you've done!" he shouted, his face inches from hers. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, a mix of fear, betrayal, and heartbreak. "I trusted you," she whispered. Her words cut through the chaos, but they didn't slow him down. He turned his back to her, frantically trying to unlock her phone, guessing the password, as he does not know her password. Oh, she reached for him, trying to stop him. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice hoarse. "That's mine!" But he ignored her. His fingers shook as he tapped at the screen. His mind was in survival mode, drowning out everything except the need to make the post disappear. And in that desperate moment, as she fought to take back her phone and he fought to erase the truth, their love story shattered. It was no longer about a picture. It was about remaining unseen from women he has scammed in the past. And the person who had once promised her safety and love now seemed like a stranger. Her refusal was final. She stood firm, her arms crossed as she stared at him with tear-filled eyes. "No," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I won't unlock it." He froze for a second, breathing heavily, fists clenched by his sides. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His fear twisted into rage, hot, overwhelming, and uncontrollable. "You're ruining everything!" he yelled, stepping closer, his face contorted with frustration. She took a step back, instinctively creating space between them. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. He didn't hear her words, only the defiance in her refusal. His world spun with panic, shame, and the terrifying realization that his life was unraveling. And in that split second, he lost all sense of reason. Before she could move again, his hands shot forward. He didn't think, he just reacted. A hard push to her shoulders. Time slowed. Her eyes widened in shock as her body tilted backward, her arms flailing to regain balance. The balcony's railing was low, far too low. "No!" she gasped, her voice a breathless plea as her feet slipped. And then she was gone. The sound of her body hitting the stone pathway below was sharp, final. For a brief moment, there was only silence, the kind of silence that settles when the unthinkable happens. He leaned over the railing, his heart pounding in his ears. She lay motionless, sprawled out on the stone below, her head at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and growing. No, 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 he whispered, stumbling backward in disbelief, his mind refusing to accept what he had just done. The distant sound of running footsteps and panicked voices began to rise. A couple on the beach had seen the fall and rushed toward her. "Someone call for help!" a voice shouted. More people gathered, their voices a blur of shock and fear. A man knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. His face fell as he shook his head. She was unresponsive. Her life, the life she had fought so hard to rebuild, was gone. Above them, the man who had once vowed to love and protect her stood frozen, his hands still trembling. In that moment, the weight of what he had done crushed him. He stumbled back from the railing, muttering to himself, "It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I didn't." But no one would hear those words. The only thing they saw was the lifeless body of a woman who had dared to share her happiness with the world, and the man who had silenced her forever. He was still in shock when the officers entered the suite. He sat slumped in a chair, his eyes darting from the balcony to the floor, as if trying to make sense of what had happened. His lips moved, repeating the same words over and over. "It was an accident. She slipped. I didn't mean for this to happen." The officers exchanged a knowing glance. One of them stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to stand up." He shook his head, his hands trembling. "You don't understand," he whispered. "We were arguing. It got out of hand." "Stand up," the officer repeated, firmer this time. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his knees buckling under the weight of his guilt. Outside, the resort guests had gathered, whispering in hushed tones as paramedics wheeled away her covered body. The once idyllic honeymoon destination had become a crime scene. The authorities began piecing together what had happened. Witnesses stepped forward to share what they had heard and seen. "There was yelling," one woman said. "I couldn't make out all the words, but he sounded furious." "I saw her fall," a man added. "She was fighting to keep her balance. It wasn't an accident." These statements painted a grim picture. A confrontation that had turned deadly. The officers placed him in handcuffs and led him away, reciting his rights as the crowd of stunned onlookers watched in silence. His attempt at feigning innocence had already crumbled. The investigation that followed revealed the dark truth behind the man who had swept her off her feet. The loving husband she believed she had married was, in reality, a professional con artist, a predator who targeted older, financially stable women. He had perfected his method over the years. Vacation resorts were his hunting grounds. He would arrive alone, but leave with the trust, and eventually the resources, of vulnerable women who believed his charm and empty promises. His lack of an online presence wasn't a quirk or a boundary. It was a tactic. Without photos, without a digital trail, he became a ghost who couldn't be tracked by his past victims. But the Facebook post had changed everything. For the first time, his face was tied to a name online. It was the one loose thread that unraveled the web of deceit he had spun for years. As the detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a trove of damning evidence. Phone records showed calls to multiple women, all with stories of romantic getaways and sudden requests for financial help. Financial transactions revealed a pattern. Large sums of money drained from accounts after brief, whirlwind relationships. Some women had been left bankrupt, while others had barely managed to recover. The most chilling part of the investigation came from the testimonies of past victims. "He told me I was his everything," one woman said, her voice shaking. "I believed him, until he disappeared with everything I had." Another recounted how she had almost reported him, but felt ashamed for falling for his lies. "I thought I was smarter than that," she admitted. Piece by piece, the investigators built their case. Each woman's story echoed the same pattern. Meet at a resort, fall in love, and watch their lives crumble as he drained their accounts and vanished. This time, however, he hadn't disappeared. He had stayed long enough for the truth to catch up to him. In court, the evidence was damning. The Facebook post that he had feared so much was presented as the key to unraveling his identity. It was the first digital footprint that linked him to his crimes, turning a post meant to celebrate love into the proof that exposed his lies. And as the stories of betrayal and loss came to light, it became clear that the woman he had married wasn't just another victim of a con. She was the one who had unknowingly brought his reign of deception to an end. But for her family and friends, no verdict could bring her back. The man who had taken everything from her now had nothing left. His freedom gone, his lies exposed, and the weight of justice closing in. The courtroom was packed by family and friends on the day of the trial. Her family sat in the front row, their grief etched into their faces as they waited for justice to be served. The trial began with the prosecutor painting a chilling picture of the man who had charmed his way into her life. "This wasn't an accident," the prosecutor said, pointing to the defendant. "This was the culmination of a calculated scheme, one that he used time and time again on unsuspecting women." The prosecutor laid out the evidence, the phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimonies that proved a pattern of deceit. They highlighted the Facebook post, the moment that exposed his double life and led to the fatal confrontation. The defense, however, attempted to paint a different story. They argued that it was a tragic accident fueled by a heated argument and poor judgment. "He didn't mean to hurt her," the defense attorney said, their voice calm but unconvincing. "This was a terrible mistake, not murder." But the prosecutor dismantled that narrative piece by piece. They showed the husband's history, how he preyed on vulnerable women, used them for their money, and vanished without a trace. The emotional climax of the trial came when the victim's family gave their impact statements. Her sister stood before the courtroom, clutching a photograph of her late sister. "She was everything to us," she said, her voice breaking. "She believed in love, even after everything she'd been through. And he took that from her. He took her from us." Her brother spoke next, his voice heavy with pain. "We trusted him because she trusted him, but he wasn't who he said he was. He robbed us of the chance to see her grow old, to see her happy. He deserves to answer for that." The room was silent as the judge delivered the final sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, a harsh punishment that ensured the husband would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The gavel hit the desk, a sound that echoed through the room and marked the end of a trial that had revealed the depths of one man's deception and the tragic loss of a woman who deserved so much more. As the husband was led out in handcuffs, he no longer wore the mask of charm that had fooled so many. His face was pale, his expression hollow. For her family, the sentence brought some closure, but it could never bring her back. And for those who had followed the case, her story became a lasting reminder. Trust can be a gift, but in the wrong hands, it can also be a fatal risk. The victim's family had every reason to crumble under the weight of their grief. They had lost someone they cherished in the most horrific way, betrayed by the very person who had vowed to protect her. But instead of being consumed by their pain, they chose to become advocates for change. Her sister became a voice for those who had been silenced by manipulation and deceit, speaking at conferences and online platforms about the importance of recognizing the signs of emotional abuse. Her brother, once quiet and reserved, found his strength in supporting organizations dedicated to preventing scams and exploitation. Their journey from grief-stricken mourners to determined advocates for justice was inspiring. But it also raised difficult questions. Why do people overlook red flags in relationships? Is it because love makes us blind? Or is it because we don't want to believe that someone we care about could be hiding something so devastating? At what point does a request for privacy stop being about personal boundaries and start becoming a warning sign? The husband's request to keep their relationship offline may have seemed harmless, even understandable. Many people prefer privacy. But in this case, it wasn't about protecting their love. It was about hiding his lies. It's easy to look back and judge, but how many of us would notice these signs in our own lives? And so we ask, if someone insisted on hiding your relationship from the world, how would you react? Would you respect their wishes, or would you ask yourself why your happiness needed to be a secret? These aren't just questions about one tragic story. They're questions about trust, boundaries, and the fragile line between love and control. This story is more than a tragedy. It's a reflection on the devastating impact of lies and betrayal. One post meant to celebrate love became the spark that ignited a tragic ending. It's a reminder that the truths we hide, whether out of fear, shame, or selfishness, can have far-reaching consequences. For her, those hidden truths led to the end of a life filled with hope and resilience. The central theme remains: trust is fragile. When broken, it leaves scars that extend far beyond the people directly involved. We often ask ourselves how well we know the people we love. But perhaps the real question is, how well do they let us know them? If this story resonated with you, we want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever overlooked red flags because of love or trust? What would you do if someone you cared about insisted on secrecy? Let's continue the conversation in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about betrayal, hidden lives, and the pursuit of justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Our next story will take you even deeper into the complexities of deception and trust. Another case that will leave you questioning everything. Stay tuned.